G-Man. Wanna play a game? You're a perfectly healthy, sane male, yet you spend a lot of your time reviewing crappy games on YouTube. Do you play these games because you want to die, or do you just want some attention? Well, tonight, you'll show me. The irony is that if you want to live, you'll have to review one more game. My game, bitch. Review or die. Make your choice.
The Saw video game, I think, is a really good early example of an instance when gaming journalists just completely missed the point of what a game was trying to do. I think it's around that same time period in the mid-2000s where we were getting some really top-notch games, and it just seemed like there was this universal standard that every game was being held to. And if something didn't have the same kind of polish you'd see in these other highly held titles, then it was completely written off.
Hello, Amanda.
Developed by Zombie Studios, who worked on a bunch of the Spec Ops games, apart from the only Spec Op game that matters, the Saw video game was released originally back in 2009, having to compete with some pretty heavy hitters at the time like Batman Arkham Asylum and even Modern Warfare 2.
But you have not given up, have you?
Now, Saw isn't a masterpiece, it's far from it.
You can suck my dick!
But it does work really well in what it's trying to do, which is to just be a side piece to the films which were still coming out at the time. And if all you wanted was to just move through a dimly lit series of death traps, fish through syringe-filled toilet bowls, and also have Billy the Puppet give you your next objective, well, then this is going to be right up your alley. You see, generally we assume that video games based off movies are going to be bad, and history has shown more often than not that that's the case.
Of course!
So when loading this thing up for the first time, well, I was expecting the worst. But it actually starts off pretty good.
The choice is yours.
You come out of a drug-induced coma to find yourself in a filthy bathroom with no idea of your whereabouts or how you even got there. So basically your mum every Sunday morning.
Just take it easy, okay?
You're playing as Detective David Tapp, who was actually Danny Glover's character from the first film at some point after the events in that film. After losing his partner and going completely off the rails with his obsession in catching Jigsaw, he somehow also managed to destroy the lives of all these people around him. So, as a result, he's been kidnapped by Jigsaw and brought to an insane asylum to complete the most elaborate series of tasks to get through in some kind of quest for redemption. And oh yes, there will be blood. It's really just an excuse though for this guy to be put through a series of horrific ordeals that are going to push his pain tolerance to new heights.
When the timer reaches 0, the bombs located all around you will detonate.
Part of what made this thing so much fun to play for me was that this really does feel like an official Saw game. From the setting itself, which looks exactly like the kind of dilapidated shithole you'd expect to see Jigsaw's victims in, through to all the various traps you have to avoid and solve along the way. And yeah, what a perfect place to set the whole thing up, an abandoned asylum. It was either going to be that, an abandoned carnival, an abandoned school, or an anime convention. You learn pretty early on too, though, that you're not the only person that's stuck in this place. And I also think that one of the coolest things in the game was when you'd be moving around the asylum and come across these rooms where other people had clearly failed in their own personal tests. You'd see this grisly death scene with a headless corpse or someone entwined in barbed wire. Their faces contorted in agony as a rundown timer hung up on the wall behind them, serving as this eternal monument to their failure. It reminds me a lot of those minor scenes in the films where you'd see these ancillary characters having met their demise, and yet serves to remind you that you're not the only fly that's caught in Jigsaw's vast web. And I think that's another big part of what the reviewers at the time also seemed to miss. I mean, it's a Saw game made for Saw fans.
Find the combination to open his cage and reroute the power back to the doors.
And I think whether or not you're into the films is going to have a huge impact on your enjoyment level.
Isn't that why you're here?
Jesus.
Now, I saw the first film 3 times in the cinema when it first came out, so with this one, well, you can guess that I was pretty much strapped in as soon as I saw that iconic bear trap mask in the game's opening. I mean, it's one of the most memorable traps from the films and also a good way to link it to the game. In fact, James Wan and Lee Wannell even reportedly helped with the development, mostly the writing, but also to come up with some of these more elaborate traps. As you move through the asylum, you get these creepy messages from Jigsaw on these flickering monitors, and it's amazing how they've managed to make each of these feel unique and authentic. They've even managed to get Tobin Bell coming back to do all of the voice work, reinforcing how commanding but also unsettling that guy's voice can be. So yeah, like I said, it feels official.
You will discover that soon enough.
The stuff you've got to put yourself through in this game is also suitably distressing, like wading through these syringe-filled toilets, or dipping your entire arm into a goddamn barrel of acid to find important items. Think too, if you ever stuck your hand into a barrel of acid up to the elbow like that, well, then that's going to be it for that entire arm, you know what I mean? You're not going to be playing the piano anytime soon after that, let's just put it that way. Seems almost every couple of minutes you're having to solve some new kind of conundrum, or with the backdrop of this creepy, dimly lit asylum that logistically just must have been a nightmare to set up. I mean, just think about all of the planning that Jigsaw's had to put into this whole shindig, it boggles the mind. This guy must have a really good event planner. And it still all looks pretty decent. Coming to life through the power of the Unreal 3 engine, which is an engine that kinda used to be the town bicycle. Character models might be a bit crappy, and you can see a fair bit of that textbook texture streaming that this engine was known for, but the environments themselves I still think look pretty good. It actually also reminded me a lot of Dead by Daylight, which is kind of ironic considering that game also runs on an Unreal engine. Not to mention, they also added Tap and Amanda Young into the game as playable characters.
That's all you care about? I just nearly died.
Now, your ultimate goal here, and the whole point of all of this, is that Tap has to rescue 6 other people being held captive inside the asylum, right? All who have some kind of link to his past and his investigations into Jigsaw. Some of these even being characters from the films, like Amanda Young, who'd go on to play a pretty big role in the first 3 films, and also Obi, who had a minor role in Saw 2. And these people all have their own unique, elaborate death traps you've got to free them from. What they do share in common though is that none of them really show any kind of gratitude for you saving their life, and almost all of them leave you right afterwards anyway.
I can't stand by as you throw away this gift from Jigsaw.
I'm leaving, and I'm not sorry.
And I gotta say that I don't get this. I mean, as far as I can tell, most of them are just angry at Tap for his obsession with trying to find Jigsaw, and then the fallout that's had on their own lives. Yeah, somehow his dedication to trying to capture a notorious serial killer is a bad thing. I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like the hallmark of a good detective. And yet everyone talks to this guy with such hatred and disdain.
Why won't you just leave me alone?
Just take it easy, okay?
You'd think the guy had gone around trying to sell copies of Mein Kampf to school kids, or snuck into people's houses and shit in their cereal boxes or something. It's like that one mission in Manhunt where you had to rescue your family members, and they were all really rude and disgusted by you, even though you've just saved their life. But I mean, there it kinda made sense because you were a guy that was on death row. Here though, you're a detective, and it just doesn't justify Tap being treated this way. Especially when, like I said, you've just saved these people from some pretty horrific deaths.
The killer's loose because of you.
If you saved me from that kind of predicament, I'd do absolutely anything you wanted me to do to say thanks. You need some money to start up a new business? You got it. You want me to wash your car or tongue your sister's asshole? I'll do it.
Hurry!
Not for these people though. In fact, you know what? Get back on the bench, asshole.
But it didn't have to come to that.
Aside from that though, Jigsaw's also locked up a heap of other people to do his bidding, with a lot of these being forced to attack Tap on sight through some kind of personal mission they've also been sent on. It makes a pretty good explanation though as to why these complete strangers would be attacking you, and it also justifies it from a gameplay perspective. You're then given a bit of freedom when choosing how to kill or not kill these people as well. Some of these you can just outright avoid. A few times you can barricade doors to keep them out, but the game doesn't punish you for killing them anyway, so I say go for it.
You're the reason I
Throughout the asylum are a bunch of smaller traps. You've got tripwires attached to sawn-off shotguns, which you can even trip off yourself if you're not careful, and I have done myself numerous times.
Are you shitting me?
But then these can also be disarmed and used against would-be attackers, who apparently I guess have tunnel vision, because they don't see a blatantly obvious wire across the hallway, they're haphazardly running down to reach you. Still though, it is pretty funny seeing someone lose their head here and slump to the ground like a sack of potatoes.
Give me that key.
If you've got a spare fuse, you can power up junction boxes and electrify a nearby pool of water, which again, these poor folks are going to run right into like complete idiots. And it's about the only downside to the enemies in this game, that they really are pretty damn stupid. I don't know, man, maybe the anesthetic that Jigsaw uses also kills off their brain cells.
One of us is going down. Nice try.
Some of these people also have explosive devices on their arms which detonate when they're killed. And then even more annoyingly, you've got to deal with other people wearing shotgun collars. Yeah, I've got to say that early on in the game, Tap ends up with one of these things around his neck. And if someone else who's wearing one gets too close to you, well, then you're gonna get a pretty grisly looking shotgun lobotomy.
This is your fault.
These alternative methods to dealing with these hostile prisoners makes for a creative way to get past these encounters. Most importantly though, it doesn't force you into melee combat, which is a good thing, because the melee combat in this game is fucking horrendous. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say here that this might be some of the worst melee combat in any single game I've ever played.
Oh god, I'm sorry, what have I done?
Right, so you've got a light and a heavy attack, as well as a block and a dodge move, and that might sound fine on paper, but none of it really matters, because of some downright horrible input delay, not to mention Tap's sluggish and slow movements. During the first proper fight you get into in this game, I actually thought it was just ignoring my inputs. But no, it really just is that slow and unresponsive. It's like trying to fight someone underwater or trying to punch someone through porridge.
Who's out there? You asked for this.
I've seen people try to defend this, saying it's because he's been sedated, but even if that's the case, that's bullshit in the long run. Because at some point, the sedative has to wear off.
Oh, shit!
Nah, son, it's just a bad combat system, and it's one of the worst things ever designed by another human being, aside from Crocs. There's different weapons like a spiked baseball bat, a scalpel, and a hatchet, but they don't seem to really differentiate all that much. You'd think you could swing a scalpel quicker than a baseball bat, but it's really much of a muchness. A few times you even get a revolver, which kind of feels like cheating, to be honest. And again, kind of reinforces how brain dead these prisoners are, in the way that they just run right towards you with no sense of self-preservation.
You ruined.
It's just a bit of a shame, man, because with a more fleshed out melee combat system, this could have been really enjoyable, not to mention helping to make you feel more guilty about the ramifications of killing these innocent people in self-defense. I think all up though, you're actually not even spending that much time in combat, and it definitely plays second fiddle to the immense amount of puzzles. Tap's also lost his shoes too, so like John McClane in Die Hard, you've got to avoid shards of glass on the floor, there's beams you need to walk across and maintain your balance, all of course in between making sure you don't catch a shotgun trap to the face. It just keeps you constantly on edge and waiting for the next life-threatening hazard to reveal itself. And then for good measure, you've got a few good jump scares thrown in here and there, when old mate Pighead shows up to say howdy. It's even got a light crafting element to it as well. You're always scrounging for supplies like nails for lockpicking, fuses for electric boxes, and if you collect enough chemicals, you can even create your own makeshift traps. The thing is though, after that 3 or 4 hour mark, you're gonna start to feel like you've seen it all before, and the reason for that is because you have. There's only so many bomb rooms, gas traps, and racks of pig carcasses you can shuffle around before you start to get a real sense of deja vu. And this is really one of the game's biggest letdowns, and that's the repetition. Because although there are some unique trap rooms and puzzles to solve, a lot of these are just pretty much rehashed. You'll be doing the same pipe puzzles, spinning gear puzzles, and power redirection puzzles over and over, along with lockpicking the same looking doors or unlocking the same looking medicine cabinets. There's a few timed rooms where you've got to complete more elaborate tests in a strict time limit, but even these are just rehashed combinations of the ones that you've already done. And that's kind of the issue with something like this too. I mean, you obviously want the game to last long enough so that you get your money's worth, but on the other hand, at what point do you say enough is enough? Later on, they'll make you complete 3 or 4 different puzzles back to back to escape a single room, as opposed to just creating entirely new puzzles for you to solve. The absolute worst it gets though is when you're saving some of the main victims, because periodically throughout these, it's going to show you an update of how close they are to being killed, I guess as a means to increase the urgency. But instead all it really does is just completely distract you, as it takes your viewpoint away from the puzzle itself. It's like trying to walk along a tightrope, but then every 10 seconds someone's going to flick you in the balls. Some of these are enjoyable enough, but then there's a couple here that are just horrible, and they're going to take a fair bit of trial and error. The other thing that's not helping is that these are often completely randomized. Every time you play the game, it's going to be different. So it's not even like the solution is something that someone thought up. It's just been randomly generated by some kind of internal number cruncher. It's bullshit. One of the last ones in the game, you've got to pick these TVs at random to match up these corresponding symbols. And this one just comes down to luck. And what makes this one even worse is that every single time you die and have to redo it, the positions are completely changed. Still though, maybe that's kind of the point, I guess, and no one involved in any of these traps is gonna get an easy ride.
Hurry up!
If anything, the crushing nature of the whole thing makes them seem even more authentic. And when you do finally beat those harder ones, you've got a new outlook on things, let me tell you. Some people are so ungrateful to solve challenging puzzles, but not me. Not anymore. Once Tap has finally rescued these 6 main victims, you're then given the choice of 2 endings called Truth and Freedom. And look, anyone who's seen the Saw films knows that you're not really going to be seeing people walking off into the sunset. And yeah, the game doesn't defy tradition in that way either. So if you're hoping it all ends with a beer and a hand job, well then think again, bitch. Now, there's 2 different endings in the game here, and both of them are suitably depressing. One of these, and I'm not going to say which, I think is the outright bad ending, with the other one being slightly less bad, but definitely still likely to take the jam out of your jelly donut. It's also technically the canon ending because the events from this one flow on into the sequel.
Oh, the hell with this.
It's kind of disappointing too that your actions leading up to this don't seem to have any effect on how things play out. You can play the entire game like an absolute psycho and kill every single person you come across, but then you still can get to this end room and just pick either the left or right door regardless. I mean, hell, you could even play eeny meeny miny mo to make your decision if you really want to. Like I said earlier, this isn't an amazing game, but if you're a fan of the films, then it definitely ticks all of these boxes. And it is kind of almost bewildering to me how this thing got as dogged as it did. If you're talking about bad games based off movies, well, I don't think this would even crack the bottom 10. It's a bit of a shame this thing turned out the way it did, because the word was that Konami were hoping to turn this into an entirely new horror franchise. They even made a sequel, Saw 2 Flesh and Blood, and that thing got even worse reviews than the first one did.
Now you will have to endure real pain.
This time though, I do think that score is justified, and I don't think this thing is underrated or underappreciated. In fact, this is probably one of the worst games I've ever played. And during one sequence in particular, it almost broke me. It was that bad. Now, I never even planned to go in depth with this one. I thought I'd just kind of mention it in passing as an afterthought towards the end of the video. Maybe do a follow-up review if people were interested.
You're a monster.
But after playing this thing for a couple of hours, it became clear that it was my civil duty to warn people not to waste their time with this. Because it really is utter dog shit.
See you around!
For starters, it's just a lazy sequel that never really needed to be made in the first place.
Fuck you.
Instead of playing as Detective David Tapp, you're playing as his son Michael. And all the other side characters in this game, just like your dad, also hate you for no real justified reason.
You obviously didn't know my father.
Jigsaw's once again putting the Tapp name to the test, making you rescue 5 other ungrateful assholes caught in these elaborate theatrical death traps.
Hello, Joseph.
Instead of an abandoned asylum, this time it's an abandoned hotel, and instead of a shotgun collar, it's a shotgun vest. Ah yes, the shotgun vest, the must-have item for this season's fashion trends.
So, this is your latest toy.
They'll start off pretty good though. During the prologue, you're playing as some random dude named Campbell, who wakes up with that iconic death mask around his neck, and a key surgically implanted under his eye like the opening of Saw 2. And credit has to be given here where it's due for just how gruesome this sequence is, where you've got to cut into your own eye to retrieve it. I think this actually came out before Dead Space 2 by about a year or so. So in terms of squeamish body horror sequences in video games, this thing's a bit of a pioneer, and definitely up there with the best of them. This whole intro serves as a bit of a tutorial, but also has some pretty big ramifications later on down the track, outright affecting the ending.
The game has just begun.
Anyway, after that, you're now playing as Michael for a short sequence, before then getting kidnapped by the very much alive Pighead right in the middle of an active crime scene. How this guy got in or out without being seen though is anyone's guess. Then you wake up in an abandoned hotel and the game begins, and from here on in is where it all just starts to slowly slide downhill.
Please, help me!
It's really just a downgrade in almost every single way, starting with the presentation, which is somehow worse off looking than the first game. The The biggest downgrade here comes during the death scenes, which just feature far simpler and less detailed animations. I mean, if you sign up for a Saw game, you kinda wanna see people being killed in horrific ways and in gruesome detail, but that's not what you often get here.
Allow me to help you with that.
And it's like watching a porno and then they cut to stock footage during the money shot.
What?
One of the other ways the game drops the ball is just by outright showing Jigsaw at numerous times throughout the game. And not like you see him on a TV or anything, he's just standing there talking to the player. This alone, I think, just ruins the mystique around the character and makes him seem less threatening and almighty.
I'll never know.
Somehow too, they managed to make a bad combat system even worse by not even including a combat system. Yeah, this time you can't even attack enemies outright anymore. What you gotta do now is wait for an on-screen button prompt and then press the right buttons at the right time to perform these instant counterattacks. If you've got a weapon though, you only have to do this process once. But I guess all of these baseball bats and pipes must be made out of chalk or something, because they all shatter and break after a single use. Yeah, gotta love those old dependable fire axes that disintegrate after hitting someone once in the head. Makes sense. You can't place traps down anymore either, or even craft your own, which was one of the most fun aspects to the first game.
Give me that key.
This sequel also has one of the dumbest enemy types I think I've ever seen in any game, and that's these guys that are stuck in these jagged metal suits, who can do little more than just run around and ram into you. Reminds me a lot of the Black Knight in Monty Python, only these guys can put you on your ass with a single hit, finishing you off with a couple more.
Oh, had enough, eh?
So what do? Well, you wait for them to almost hit you before you then step to the side and let them ram into something. Sounds fine in concept, but it sucks during gameplay because Michael moves so fucking slowly. There's no kind of dodge or evade move, you just very slowly sidestep left or right at a pace I wouldn't even call a light jog to try to avoid taking a hit. The only way to kill them is by baiting them to run into something or to kind of run off a drop to their death. In fact, during one of these sequences, they even threw in the Wilhelm scream. And you'll have to do this like half a dozen times throughout the campaign. The biggest problem though this time are the puzzles, which are just so horribly designed, and it's so poorly communicated to the player as to what you're even supposed to be doing.
Oh my god, it hurts!
All of these main traps in the game, the ones where you've got to save one of the victims, are just so poorly explained that you're probably going to accidentally kill these people half a dozen times before you even know what you're supposed to be doing.
Get yourself in a pickle, did you?
Like this one here, you've got to press the buttons on this board to release this nurse by matching up these numbers at the bottom. When you press a switch, what it does is add and subtract the difference between each number to these two numbers on the bottom. So if the switch says 2 on the left and 8 on the right, it's going to add 6 to one side and also subtract 6 from the other. Make sense? No, it doesn't, does it? Which is my whole fucking point.
Fuck you.
How about this one, where you got to prevent this girl from drowning to death by making all of these pipes line up during rotation? I mean, you're literally told nothing here and just dropped right into it, with the image of that water level slowly rising up behind you. And I just have to assume that the person who designed this has some kind of fetish for watching women drown, because that's something you're going to see over and over here until you figure the whole thing out. For all of your effort and hard work, you're rewarded with more dialogue where someone talks down to you like you're a complete piece of shit. And you know what? I'm sick and tired of rescuing all of these people from certain death only to have them turn around and be rude to me. Good manners cost nothing, son.
What did we ever do to deserve this, right?
Even outside of all these sequences, you can't afford to stop paying attention because the amount of random traps you've got to watch out for is just on another level. Jigsaw really dialed his asshole factor up to 11 for this sequel, let me tell you. Every second door you're opening has got some kind of shotgun or axe trap behind it, requiring not 1 but 2 button presses to deactivate. And because I'm colorblind, I accidentally kill myself half the time, because the color for the A and the Y button looks the same to me at first glance. Yeah, this game ain't very friendly to the color challenged. It's got a couple of other puzzles that'll really punish those of us who can't tell the difference between green and yellow. I'm not kidding either, the amount of side traps in this game is horrendous. There's floors and ceilings that collapse when you're under them. There's shotgun tripwires which you're actually better off activating on purpose, because trying to get close enough to disarm them doesn't even work half the time. Probably the cheapest one is when you're peeking through doors and come face to face with a gun barrel. Later on in the game, you've got to avoid this guy who looks like a poor man's Baraka, with blades for arms, and this is entirely just pressing the right button at the right time. And again, because all of these are also randomized, it's not like you can even get into any kind of rhythm, because the button prompts change every single time. Checkpoints are really sporadic too, and sometimes you can clear out 2 or 3 rooms, avoid a couple of death traps without any checkpoint in between, and that is just horse shit. Shit from a horse. Then you've got these other puzzles that aren't even challenging and just feel more like lame time wasters. Like this one here where you've got to walk across these TV screens in the right sequence. Walk on the wrong one and you get zapped. The solution to all of these is simple and easy, but the time it takes to get through it is slow and methodic. It's like a worse off, edgier version of the Word of God test from Indiana Jones. Only in the footsteps of an asshole like Jigsaw shall he proceed. This also might have one of the weirdest lockpicking mechanics I think I've ever seen, where you've got to guide the lockpick past these rotating tumblers in real time. And what makes even less sense is that the configuration for the lock changes every single time you retry it, even on the same door. I mean, that's one seriously sophisticated security system. Other than that though, a lot of these puzzles are just flat out recycled from the first game, like having to spin these circuits around to connect the power. They've also reused that same mixing puzzle from the first game, the one where you had to mix up an antidote to save Amanda, only this time you're mixing up chemicals to make a homemade bomb. Same thing with having to again memorize the placement of pictures on TV screens and matching them up with a corresponding symbol. And off the back of that, it also reminds me of one of the most sadistic puzzles in the entire game, where you've got to push this guy along railings, pushing or pulling him back and forth so he doesn't get roasted by these fire jets. In between, also solving one of these memory puzzles under the added pressure of a time limit. I mean, this one's just cruel.
I need to know everything.
The worst one by far though is one of the last sequences in the game where you've got to go around what can only be described as a shotgun carousel. It's this spinning platform with wire blocking off and directing your movements where you've got to avoid these red spotlights which are going to set off your shotgun vest and kill you. And this is what I was talking about earlier. This bit right here almost broke me. So look, if you're the person who made this and you're watching this video, and let's face it, you probably are, then I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Fuck you.
You broke him. Fuck you.
I don't think this thing is all bad though, and you can still look for peanuts even in a turd this big. I think it's kind of cool how they actually used that music from the movies in the main menu, and hearing that theme alone definitely got me amped up before playing the game. There is, I think, also a pretty good overall atmosphere to the whole thing. I mean, it's not as grim and dark as the first game, but it does have some pretty gnarly moments here and there. Like seeing this guy's head inside a tank of what looks like acid. I mean, that shit is metal, man. I also think the ending is a neat twist. I mean, in a film series that's always been about never really knowing what Jigsaw has up his sleeve, turns out your actions with the prologue also determine the fate of Michael at the end of the game. In a game that seems to not have that many fresh or creative ideas, this is definitely one of the most shocking elements and genuinely surprised me when it happened.
Now you must make a choice.
So you've got one game here that I don't think deserves a lot of the negativity, and then on the other hand, another game that deserves all the negativity.
It's over.
Either way though, these are some pretty unique games that it seems time has mostly forgotten. I don't think either of these are must-have or must-play titles, and the second game was so expensive to get on eBay that I should almost be offended by how much it cost me. But as a couple of cult status horror titles with some decent body horror elements, they're not a complete write-off, and they're still better than Batman Forever, that's for sure.
Give me that key.